Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, a new Middle East emerging after Israel's victories over Hamas and Hezbollah. Plus, Sharia law looming in Syria, according to its new leader, Mohammed Al-Julani, and holding the line for democracy. Taiwan standing firm in the face of the Chinese military threat, and helping broken hearts heal. Vastly different people gather on a farm to show support for Israel. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. In recent weeks, it seems like changes have been coming in the Middle East at lightning speed. Israel's security goals may not have been fully achieved yet, but according to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel is changing the Middle East. Here's the latest. In his Sunday announcement, Netanyahu said he and Trump discussed the need to complete Israel's victory and declared it's a new Middle East.
A year ago, I said something simple. We would change the face of the Middle East, and we're indeed doing so. Syria is not the same Syria. Lebanon is not the same Lebanon. Gaza is not the same Gaza. And the head of the axis, Iran, is not the same Iran. It has also felt the might of our arm.
The Security Cabinet also met to discuss the next steps in Israel's multi-front war, including stopping Iranian armed shipments through Syria. After the fall of the Assad regime, the Russians are pulling out of their bases. While Netanyahu says Israel has no interest in confronting Syria, the IDF is increasing its presence in the Golan Heights and systematically destroying Syria's military infrastructure.
I remind you that for decades, Syria was an active enemy state to Israel. It attacked us again and again. It allowed others to attack us from its territory. It allowed Iran to arm Hezbollah through its territory.
Netanyahu and Trump also discussed freedom for the hostages. Antony Blinken said the moment has come to find a solution.
So this is a moment to bring this to an end, and bring this to an end in a way that gets the hostages home and finally brings relief to people who suffered and continue to suffer every single day.
In Syria, the country's new leader, Mohammed Al-Julani, declared his group will implement Sharia law and have a morality police.
The Ministry of Interior will have morality police led by clerics and mullahs. People will be told to obey Sharia without using sticks. If we move with a stick, this shows our inability to convey Sharia to people. We will respond with force to those who try to prevent us from implementing Sharia.
Nina Shea, Director of Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, told CBN News what Sharia law means for Syrian Christians.
They will have to conform with Muslim laws, Islamic law. That means that they will be restricted in what they can say, how they can pray, where they can pray. They will be restricted, and women will be very restricted in their dress, in particular.
Shea says Christians in the West need to stand up for Syrian Christians at this dangerous time.
Should stand up for these Christians. They should be a voice for them. They shouldn't, particularly, I think, bring pressure against Turkey, who is our NATO ally and who has supported HTS and is considered by the Christians that I've talked to there, Christian leaders, as a manager and an influencer of this rebellion that has taken place.
During his press conference, President-elect Trump weighed in on the sudden takeover of Syria by rebel forces. He also suggested Turkish leader Recep Erdogan was deeply involved and sees Syria as part of his plan to reconstruct a Turkish empire.
Turkey's the one behind it. He's a very smart guy. They've wanted it for thousands of years, and he got it. And those people that went in are controlled by Turkey. And that's okay. It's another way to fight.
Trump's comments come as U.S. officials fear Turkish-backed forces are massing on the border of northeast Syria for an imminent invasion. The territory is controlled by Kurdish forces and an independent and democratic government that was an ally with the U.S. in the war against ISIS. In a letter to Trump, leaders warned of catastrophic consequences if they were invaded and asked Trump to press Erdogan to not send troops across the border. As to Israel's war with Iran's proxies, Trump was bullish on his talk with Netanyahu.
The real conversations will start on the 20th, but we had a really good conversation, and I think we're going to be in a good place in the Middle East.
Trump said getting the hostages free is a priority.
As you know, I gave warning that if these hostages aren't back home by that date, all hell's going to break out, and very strong.
The release of the hostages is one of the toughest issues since October 7th. Now that Hamas realizes Hezbollah and Iran are not coming to its rescue, the group may be ready to finally bargain with Israel. Israel's defense minister told the Knesset Monday that a deal is the nearest it's been since the last agreement.
We all estimate that an opportunity is being created following Hamas's need to become more flexible, and I really hope we can advance to a practical stage in this process.
According to the Washington Post, Hamas is no longer insisting the war in Gaza completely end, and all Israeli troops depart as a precondition for releasing hostages. Meanwhile, a new study reports Hamas has vastly inflated the number of Gazans killed in the 14-month war. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza claims 45,000 dead, but the Henry Jackson Society's report disputes that number. It concludes Hamas's reporting has a number of distortions. Men listed as women to inflate female fatalities. Adults registered as children to inflate child fatalities, including 5,000 natural deaths, as well as people killed by Hamas in the death totals, including deaths before the war began, and no mention of combatant deaths, as many as 17,000. Military historian John Spencer said during its war with Hamas, Israel has done more to mitigate civilian deaths than any other military in history. All eyes are on Syria right now as militant Islamic groups have taken control after ousting the Assad regime. Senior reporter Gary Lane explored the implications of that in his interview with Greg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum. Here's an excerpt from the Global Lane.
Israel conducts preemptive strikes to protect itself from militant Islamists who have taken control of Syria. Just how dangerous are the new rulers in Damascus, the rebel group HTS, Hayat Tahrir el-Sham? And what might the future hold for Israel and Syrian Christians under their rule? Well, joining us to provide some insights is Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman. Greg, the Islamist leader now forming an interim government in Damascus, Abu Mohammed Al-Julani, once headed up the al-Nusra Front, which was affiliated with al-Qaeda, and he pledged to impose Sharia law and establish a caliphate throughout the Levant. But now he says he wants peace with Syria's neighbors, except for Iran and Hezbollah. And he wants to protect the rights of all minority groups in Syria. So has the leopard changed his spots? Why should we believe him?
I think we have to be very cautious and careful about the fact that a so-called former al-Qaeda operative, the head of al-Qaeda's divisional command in Syria, who was actually dispatched there by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the now dead head and founder of the Islamic State, is claiming to want peace. I think that his words versus the actions on the grounds have to be carefully criticized and analyzed insofar as it relates that there's a very different fabric of what's going on in the day-to-day operations now in post-Assad Syria, rather than what his missives may suggest otherwise.
Well, how about Syria's Christian community? Many are saying they're fine for now. They're not suffering atrocities yet. They're concerned for the future. How concerned should they be?
So there is something to be given that HTS, when it was ruling just Idlib, which is the sliver of Syrian territory that it's controlled for the past 13 years in the northwest of the country, went so far as to have Islamist-ran ministries encourage Christians to celebrate Christmas, Easter, and other holidays, especially from the Syriac Orthodox churches that were active in that province. But now that they've moved from a rebel group to taking full control, or almost full control, of all Syrian territory west of the Euphrates River, and even have gone so far as to try and bring the top bishop from Aleppo to speak on their behalf. I'm not sure if they're going to keep on carrying out these type of propaganda-like exercises, considering the fact that they're on their way to establish an Islamic State in Syria.
So we've got to look at their past and look what they've done in Idlib and elsewhere. And How about Israel? Now, they've received international criticism for taking out Syrian naval ships in Latakia and destroying chemical weapons facilities near Damascus, even sending troops over the border into Syria from the Golan. So did those actions violate international law? How important was it for Israel to take those measures?
I think anyone looking at a clear-eyed view of what is happening now in Syria and a post-Assad regime, and even reports that have come out from the Ministry of Intelligence and the Ministry of the Interior in Syria, leaked documents that were actually put on Twitter this week, show that there was sort of a Faustian bargain between Israel and Assad prior to his fall, in which Israel agreed for Syria to have a certain amount of arms to be able to fight back against the insurgency, which has now completely conquered the territory, as I said beforehand, west of the Euphrates. But that was in exchange for it trying to provide Israel with backgrounders information on weapons transports that were being sent from Iran into Iraq through Syria and then to Hezbollah. Now that that bargain is officially over, Israel had to invoke Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, its right to self-defense, and take out any strategic weaponry that, God forbid, would fall into the hands of the Islamist mercenaries and the Islamist rebels, which have now taken over Damascus. Israel was well within its international rights to destroy any weaponry which new forces that it does not have an agreement with would be able to use to target Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. I think it was completely justified, and the international community is acting like a peanut gallery, not understanding Israel's true security needs.
Yeah, I can't imagine HTS with a Navy and also with chemical weapons. Can you?
No, not at all. And it's not just it's not just Israeli forces which have been on the lookout for this. There are reports of American intelligence provision to its Kurdish allies in the SDF, for members of the Druze communities in Swaya in southern Syria on the northern Golan Heights, but on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, helping provide information on the whereabouts this area. And even we have reports of a top Syrian chemist being assassinated in the neighborhoods of Damascus. So I think Israel is going to its full extent to not just eliminate the apparatus, which was Syria's chemical weapons program, but also all those who have the know-how and the knowledge to reactivate it under an HTS regime.
Okay, now Turkey has supported HTS and another group, the SNA, which is really the Turkish surrogate army battling Kurdish forces in northeast Syria. So to what extent should the U.S. get involved to help our Kurdish allies? After all, I mean, you remember they helped Donald Trump and the United States eliminate the ISIS threat. They destroyed the Islamic Caliphate. So what should we do about it?
I think it's come to recognize the U.S. policy should call for a semi-autonomous or maybe completely autonomous region of Rojava, or that of the Kurdish enclave, which is east of the Euphrates River in northeast Syria. And if the U.S. is not willing to back its Kurdish allies, what kind of message does that send to other American allies throughout the rest of the world, which have fought hand in glove with American forces on the ground in areas which have posed a threat to U.S. national security interests? As relates to Turkey, this is the Ottomanization of Erdogan's grand vision to cast the Sunni Pale to replace the Shia Crescent, which is now dissolving as Iran is kicked out of the greater Arabic-speaking Middle East. And I think the U.S. has to be very careful in terms of dealing with the SNA, with HTS, and any other force which may come to power in Damascus. It should be U.S. policy to back its allies to the hilt. And right now, Erdogan is not acting like an American ally insofar as he's supporting, arming, and giving logistics and intelligence to a force which is trying to wipe out the Kurdish presence in Syria.
I know you'll be keeping an eye on this for further developments, Greg, and thank you for your time. Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman, thanks for being with us.
Many of our guests on Jerusalem Dateline have said that Israel's fight to defend its existence is a battle that could extend to the Western world. Our next guest from Taiwan has a similar message. Here's what she said about the importance of defending democracy. Ambassador, it's a real pleasure and honor to have you here with us. You've been ambassador now for 3 years to Israel. Tell us the relationship between Taiwan and Israel.
The relationship between Taiwan and Israel is a robust one. Over the past 30 years, we have signed 33 government-to-government agreement that encompass a broad range of cooperations in terms of education, agriculture, health, and also to promote people-to-people ties. The relationship is a very solid and moving forward.
Yeah. How would you describe the threat that China poses to Taiwan. I understand one of the most robust military exercises just took place.
Yes, we have been living under Chinese military threat for decades. It's not a news for us, but certainly they have been intensified in scale. Not only the military intimidations, also including the economic coercion, cyber attack, disinformation campaign, and even the gray zone coercions nowadays. We are facing tremendous challenges to defend our democratic way of life. We intend to preserve our democracy, our freedom, to let our people continue to enjoy the religious freedom, all type of freedom in Taiwan. It is a strong commitment from our government to strengthen our national capability to defend ourselves.
Why is the freedom for Taiwan so important for people in the West and the world in general? Why is this so important that Taiwan remain free?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Taiwan is a democracy. Taiwan is a young but vibrant democracy. Our democracy came a long way from autocracy to a full democracy it is today. It is a shining beacon of democracy in the East. If Taiwan cannot prevail, the global democratic value, the liberal international order will be disrupted. So this will be huge consequences for the global societies. Taiwan's democracy is under threat, but we are committed to defend it. We also believe the linchpin of global peace, stability, and prosperity also rely on Taiwan's continuous peace and stability.
Yeah, Ambassador, a pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for your perspective on this very, very important time and place.
Thank you.
What would bring an Orthodox Jew, an Iranian Christian, and a large family from the Arctic Circle to collect olives in Israel? It has to do with connections they all feel with communities still suffering the aftermath of October 7th. We've witnessed similar scenes of support from visitors in the last year, and they're signs of hope. Take a look. Harvesting olives around areas devastated on October 7th is one project of Genesis 123 Foundation. It's also building bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel.
We chose to work along the Gaza border in communities that were the most hardest hit by the Hamas massacre, to take the olives from those communities that wouldn't otherwise be used, to turn them into oil and then create revenue for that goes back into their own communities.
Founder Jonathan Feldstein says a key goal is making meaningful relationships.
Everyone is overwhelmed, grateful, excited about the fact that these Christian volunteers have come, especially now. We're in the midst of a war.
Feldstein, an Israeli and Orthodox Jew, has partnered with Marzi Amirizadeh, an Iranian Christian sentenced to death by the Islamic Republic regime for her faith, who now lives in the United States.
The whole idea to bring Christians to harvest olives was Marzi's.
After October 7th, I felt a big responsibility in my heart to encourage more Christians to stand up with Jews and restore friendship between Persian and Jews.
Marzi met Feldstein and his family 2 years ago during her first visit to Israel, and they realized they shared a similar vision.
The vision that God gave me is root and branch.
The verse from Romans 11 referencing the Jews as the root, supporting the branch. And then from Ezekiel 36, the prophecy of when the Jewish people come home, the land will blossom again. Now these trees that we're harvesting epitomizes the flourishing and the blossoming. Every olive that we pick, every liter of oil that we make, that's a fulfillment of prophecy.
Helping the land heal brought Sarah Stewart, her husband Luke, and their 6 children to Israel. They had to take multiple flights from their Alaskan home to get here.
We lived in this small Eskimo village of 100 people above the Arctic Circle. As we learned Hebrew, we learned what God is doing in the land of Israel.
October 7th happened. When I saw some of the pictures of the children who were taken captive, I realized that those could have been my kids. For a year, I've been trying to come, wanting to do something, wondering what I can do.
Sarah says her kids forage berries back home in Alaska, so shaking olives from trees is easy.
This is a really, really fun time for us. Israel's in the Father's heart. We just want to be a part of what he loves.
Pastor Danny Austin identifies with an historic failure of the church.
When the Holocaust took place, the world was blinded, or they didn't want to see, and they said it wasn't real, and so they just walked away. So here we are with 18 people. I'm going to go back and tell our church. They know the Bible, and they know how important it is to be involved with what's taking place in Israel.
Cindy McCain tells CBN News that she came from Georgia to see the situation firsthand and spread the word back home.
To bear witness to people in the United States of what Israel has gone through, and that's one thing that breaks my heart.
Jonathan helped me to visit all the communities that were destroyed by terrorists, and it was very heartbreaking.
Since Marzi experienced torture in Iran, she can uniquely identify with the suffering here.
I was in prison. I was sentenced to death by hanging just because of, believing in Jesus. And the regime executed my best friend. They killed my husband. So to see what happened to Israeli people, I totally understand their pain and suffering.
Gad Sobel told the group how Hamas kidnapped his twin grandsons, Ziv and Gali, from their home in Kfar Aza and remain in captivity.
We are waiting every day to get them alive.
In response to Gad sharing about his grandchildren in Gaza, the group gathered around in an impromptu show of support.
Christians always want to pray, and that was organic. That just happened. When Cindy prayed, and when Marzi prayed, and you saw the tears streaming down her face, that was real. That was powerful. Those are the meaningful relationships.
What a wonderful story of connection and support for Israel coming from around the world. And the Root and Branch is a great organization. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And be sure to sign up for our email blasts so you can keep up with breaking news, which is coming fast these days. And please keep praying for Israel and the peace of Jerusalem, for the safety of IDF soldiers fighting on so many fronts, and for all those caught in harm's way. For all of us here in the Jerusalem Bureau, I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.